This is the arcade experience. We're Colecovision, and we bring the arcade experience home. Because your vision is our vision. Colecovision.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Player One Start. Today we're going to take a look at one of the most legendary consoles of the early 1980s, the Colecovision.
Now you can bring the arcade experience home. Introducing ColecoVision, the most advanced video game system you can buy. It plays more games than any other system.
In 1975, Atari's Pong was a major hit in both arcades and self-contained home units. With the overnight success of Pong, all kinds of companies were attempting to make the leap into video games, including the Connecticut Leather Company, also known as Coleco. They had started their business in leather goods and then moved to manufacturing plastic wading pools. A year after Pong's release, Coleco entered the video game fray with their very first Pong clone, the Telstar. In addition to containing a Pong clone, the chip had been modified to include two variations of the game, hockey and handball. Having more than one game also made the Telstar the world's first dedicated console. Although Atari owned the rights to Pong legally, they couldn't battle the tidal wave of clones hitting the market. At first, the Telstar was a big seller, and over the next 2 years, Coleco released several different models, each with more Pong variations and an increase in quality. The microchip that the Telstar used was actually manufactured by General Electric. As GE wasn't bound by an exclusive agreement, any company seeking to get into the video game business could get their own Pong clone using GE chips. As people began to tire of Pong, Atari saw the potential in creating a system that could offer a wide variety of games on interchangeable cartridges, and in 1977 they released the Atari 2600, at that time known as the Video Computer System, or VCS. The 2600 became a major success, dominating the market until 1982, when Coleco decided to release a new console, the ColecoVision. By the early 1980s, computer technology was becoming less expensive, and consumers were craving higher quality games. Coleco delivered this by being the first to put high-quality graphics into a video game console. Although the advanced technology was a selling point, it was not enough to pull away customers from the established dominating force of the Atari 2600. Also in the early 1980s, Nintendo was wanting to get into the home video game market as well, and they developed their own Pong clone, known as the Color TV game system. Nintendo's main game business was coming from arcades with their first major hit, Donkey Kong. At the time, there was a bidding war between Atari and Mattel for the home video game rights to Donkey Kong, but Coleco swooped in with an immediate offer and a promise to make the game higher quality than any other system could deliver. Donkey Kong went to Coleco, who made a near-perfect recreation and packaged it with the ColecoVision. The chance to play the arcade game hit at home drove sales of the console to major success. The ColecoVision was released in August of 1982 in the United States and offered a closer experience to more powerful arcade game systems compared to competitors such as the Atari 2600. By Christmas of 1982, Coleco had sold more than 500,000 units, in part due to the strength of its bundled game, Donkey Kong. The ColecoVision's main competitor was arguably more advanced but less commercially successful, the Atari 5200. The ColecoVision was distributed by CBS Electronics outside of North America and was branded as the CBS ColecoVision in Europe. Sales quickly passed 1 million units in early 1983 before the video game crash. By the beginning of 1984, quarterly sales of the ColecoVision had dramatically decreased. Over the next 18 months, the Coleco company ramped down its video game division, ultimately withdrawing from the video game market by the end of the summer of 1985. The ColecoVision was officially discontinued by October of 1985, and while the total sales of the ColecoVision are uncertain, they were ultimately in excess of 2 million units. While the console continued to sell, mostly up until its discontinuation date, the video game crash of 1983 was credited as the main cause of the ColecoVision being discontinued. In 1983, Spectra Video announced the SV603 ColecoVision video game adapter for its SV318 computer. The company stated that the $70 product allowed users to enjoy the entire library of exciting ColecoVision video game cartridges. Looking at the hardware of the ColecoVision, the main console unit consists of a 14 by 8 by 2 inch rectangular plastic case that houses the motherboard, with a cartridge slot on the right side and connectors for the external power supply and RF jack at the rear. The controllers connect to plugs in the recessed area on the top of the unit. The design of the controllers is similar to that of Mattel's Intellivision. The controller is rectangular and consists of a numeric pad and a set of buttons on each side. In place of the circular control disc below the keypad, the Coleco has a short 1.5-inch joystick. The keypad is designed to accept a thin plastic overlay that maps the keys for a particular game. Each ColecoVision console shipped with 2 controllers. All first-party cartridges, and mostly third-party software, feature a 12-second pause before presenting the game select screen. This delay results from an intentional loop in the console's BIOS to enable an on-screen display of the ColecoVision brand logo. Companies like Parker Brothers, Activision, and Microfun bypass this loop. So this was a console that I recently picked up off of eBay, and that's why I have the CBS ColecoVision, and that's why there's different languages off to the side. I actually got this imported from Canada, but it works with all of the North American released ColecoVision games, so I'm not too concerned about compatibility issues. I definitely enjoy having the box here. You can tell that they were definitely wanting to sell this as the Donkey Kong equivalent of the arcade machine. And it shows some very impressive graphic artwork that is on the front of the box. I don't know how they captured these. Usually they did this by just putting a camera up to the TV screen and hoping that they got a clear picture. And this is continued across each spine of the box, similar to the Magnavox Odyssey 2, because they also printed on all corners of the box as well. And you can see they advertise the expansion modules on the back. Alright, taking a look at the console, you can see the controllers on here. They are similar to the Mattel Intellivision, but they are able to be unplugged and swapped out for a different controller. I'll show more about that later. And you can see the controller ports in there. They are very similar to the Sega Genesis. Alright, there are 6 screws on the back we need to take out before we can take apart the plastic. And with great difficulty I was able to get this to separate, but there was something keeping it from coming apart there at the end. You can see the motherboard barely takes up half of the actual case. We'll remove this RF shield and we'll have a tour of the board. So here's the expansion port. This is the Z80 processor, cartridge port, RAM chips, video chip, which has its own heatsink. Here are all the RAM chips for video RAM. The sound chip is over here. I believe that's it, the Texas Instrument chip. And yeah, overall a pretty neat board. Of course, this is the RF modulator. We're not going to mess with that. Now, even though it's not necessary to, I'm going to go ahead and take off the back plate of this as well and inspect the bottom of the motherboard. I'm only doing this because I want to see if any of the capacitors have leaked through the board and if there's any damage or residue on the back. Doesn't look like there is. This board's in pretty good shape. Looking at the tech specs of the hardware, you can see on the motherboard the CPU is a Zilog Z80 running at 3.58 MHz. The video processor was a Texas Instrument chip, which could provide a 256 by 192 pixel resolution. The video chip could also produce 32 sprites on screen at once, and all 16 colors. A separate sound chip, also by Texas Instruments, had 3 tone generators and 1 noise generator. The ColecoVision was packed with 16 kilobytes of video RAM, which was more than any of its competitors. However, it only had 1 kilobyte of regular RAM. It could accept ROM cartridges, typically 8 kilobytes, but at a maximum capacity of 32 kilobytes. The hardware specs do not end with the main console, as some expansion modules were released as well. Expansion Module 1 makes the ColecoVision compatible with the industry-leading Atari 2600. Although there were a few exceptions, most games were compatible. This expansion module gave the ColecoVision the largest software library of any console of its day. As expected, the expansion module prompted legal action from Atari, but Atari was unable to stop sales of the module because the 2600 could be reproduced with off-the-shelf parts. The second expansion module is a driving controller with a steering wheel and gas pedal. This module came packed with a port of the arcade game Turbo.
We got it!
Great, and I'm driving.
It's ColecoVision's new driving module with Sega's Turbo, the video cartridge that looks and plays just like the arcade game.
The gas pedal is merely as simple as an on-off switch. Many gamers use the second ColecoVision controller as the gear shift for more precise speed control. Although Coleco called the driving controller an expansion module, it actually plugs into the controller port and not the expansion module interface. The controller is also compatible with the games Destructor, Bump and Jump, Pit Stop, and the Dukes of Hazzard. The third, and perhaps most involved expansion module, converts the ColecoVision into a full-fledged computer known as the Atom, complete with keyboard, digital data pack cassette drives, and printer.
Programming's simple.
Sure.
Try it this way.
Now, command the powers of Atom, the complete 80K computer system all in one package.
I got it. But what if I forget it?
Take it home with you.
That must cost thousands.
Other systems do. With them, word processor, extra. Printer, extra. Memory drives, extra.
An Atom?
All included.
Command the powers of Atom and program your future.
There's also a separate trackball controller known as the Roller Controller, which came packed with the arcade game Slither, which was a Centipede clone. The ColecoVision mainly lives on today due to its admiration by vintage video game collectors. In 2009, IGN named the ColecoVision their 12th best video game console out of their list of 25, citing its incredible accuracy in bringing current generation arcade hits to the home. In 2014, At Games began producing the ColecoVision Flashback, which is a micro-console with 60 games built in, including Sega's Zaxxon and Exidy's Venture. In 2012, Opcode Games released an expansion module number 4, which was the Super Game module. This module expands the ColecoVision's memory to 32K and doubles the number of sound channels. This company continues to release new games for the ColecoVision as of 2018. Alright, let's go ahead and get this console put back together. Again, I had some trouble getting that plastic piece to snap back in. Let's go ahead and bring it down to the game room and we can test out the gameplay. Alright, I'm going to plug in the power cable. And I'm using a composite cord for the RF out signal, but I have an adapter on the other end. And now the huge power adapter. And now for the moment of truth. Alright, I decided to go ahead and start with the game that defined the ColecoVision, and that is Donkey Kong. Again, Nintendo licensed the home rights to Donkey Kong only to Coleco, and they developed most of the versions across all the different platforms. And I'll be if this isn't the best home port of Donkey Kong out of this generation that I've seen to date. I played this game on the Atari 2600, as well as the Intellivision, and I have to say, this is by far the best port of Donkey Kong. I mean, just look at the graphics, and listen to all of the sound effects that are perfectly ported from the arcade. Again, in the early 1980s, the biggest selling point for most home consoles was how close they can get to the original arcade version. And this was around the time when people were very disappointed in the home port of Pac-Man for the Atari 2600, so this would have been a major selling point for the ColecoVision in 1982. And also, since this is my first impression of the console, I must say that this game handles very well. I like the mini joystick that's built into the controller, and it makes Mario very easy to control. And as I mentioned earlier, you are able to swap out the controllers, and guess what? The Sega Genesis controllers are completely compatible with the ColecoVision. And since I like the directional pad better than the joystick, I went ahead and played most of the games using the Sega Genesis controller. Alright, next, let's go ahead and take a look at a game called Choplifter. This game was originally developed in 1982 for the Apple II, and was published by Broderbund. Anyway, it was ported to the Atari 5200, as well as the Commodore 64, VIC-20, MSX, as well as the ColecoVision. In this game, the player assumes the role of a combat helicopter pilot. The player attempts to save hostages being held in prisoner of war camps in a territory being ruled by the evil, bungling Empire. The player must collect the hostages and transport them safely to the nearby friendly base, all the while fighting off hostile tanks and other enemy combatants. I find the gameplay of this game just a little bit addicting. However, I did have trouble at first figuring out how to play this game. You actually have to turn the helicopter by pressing buttons on the controller rather than just tilting your joystick back and forth. The only thing that happens when you move your joystick left or right is the helicopter moves left or right. Now, this is not the first time I played this game, but I do believe that this is a very faithful port, and actually, this may be my new favorite way to play this game. Next up, we're going to take a look at Star Trek Strategic Operations Simulator, also known as Star Trek SOS or Star Trek Arcade. This game is a space combat simulation based on the Star Trek television program and movie series. It was released in 1983, originally a vector game, with a two-dimensional display and three-dimensional first-person perspective. The player controls the Starship Enterprise and must defend sectors from invading Klingon ships. Now, as you can tell, I wasn't very good at this game at first, and it took me a few playthroughs before I finally got the hang of it. There's an awkward moment where the ending music lasts longer than the gameplay. So unlike most arcade games at the time, this game was presented with multiple views of the playfield. However, I found myself only using one, as the first-person view was not very fun at all. Throughout this game, survival depends on the player's ability to effectively use and manage shield energy, photon torpedoes, and warp energy. These are replenished by docking with starbases, which sometimes must be saved from destruction at the hands of the Klingons. Overall, I feel that this is a solid port, but I did not like this game as much as I did on other consoles. This game was also ported to the Apple II, Atari's 8-bit line of computers, the 2600, 5200, Commodore 64, as well as the TI-99 and VIC-20. I would actually recommend the version for the Vectrex, as it also uses authentic vector graphics. However, the gameplay is a little bit different than the game here. Moving on to another arcade classic, let's take a look at the game Tapper. I used to be pretty good at this game back in the day. Some of you may know that there are two versions of this game, and this game is the second version. The original version was just known simply as Tapper, and it was originally sponsored by Anheuser-Busch. However, since it was deemed too adult for children to play, they decided to change it to Root Beer Tapper for the home market. The goal of the game is to serve all the customers before they get to the end of the bar, all while making sure that no glasses hit the floor. This can be challenging, as sometimes customers will shoot glasses back across the bar at you, so you have to keep an eye on both ends of the table. And as you go through different screens, it gets more challenging as you go. Let's take a look at some of the levels I was able to get to. So overall, I'm just a tad bit rusty at this, but not too bad of a playthrough for the first time picking this up in years. Rockin' Bolt is a puzzle game developed by Activision. It was released for a number of home consoles, including the Colecovision, but also went on to consoles like the Commodore 64, SG-1000, and the MSX. The game follows a plot of a construction worker named Louie, who must bolt down moving platforms in the correct location within a set time limit. Not all levels have a set time limit, and the game increases in difficulty as you move forward. Most of my experience with this game has been on the Commodore 64, but really it was actually an emulated port on Windows 95 when Activision released a compilation of their greatest hits. However, my skills in that game translate very easily to this port. So before you can move on from level 1, you have to get all the platforms mounted down and be able to make it back to the starting point to continue. In level 2, you'll notice there's now a map in the bottom corner. To proceed to the next level, you must get all the pieces bolted down in the correct shape and order as in the map, so that you can get the platform to appear. And then it's on to the next stage. And last, we're going to take a look at a game based on a movie, and that is War Games. This game was another one made by Coleco specifically for the ColecoVision. It was later ported to the Atari 8-bit family, as well as the Commodore 64. The gameplay begins faithful enough, with the iconic "Greetings, Professor Falcon" appearing on the screen. The goal of the game is to defend the United States against a nuclear attack. At the main game screen, the United States is divided up into 6 sectors, each with its own major bases and cities. ICBMs and bombers reign over the North Pole, while submarines inch in towards the coast. Defenses consist of ABMs, interceptor jets, submarines, and an experimental particle beam satellite. However, that's probably hard to discern on the screen because it just looks like blobs and pixels and just junk. However, I decided to try a strategy. Since I wasn't really figuring out how to play this game too well anyway, I decided to take a tip from the movie. The best way to win is not to play. Let's see what happens. So in a remarkable twist, if I did nothing throughout the entire game, yeah, most of my cities are destroyed, but I have one base left, which is like that 0.01% of bacteria left when you use hand soap. I mean, that's what's left, and somehow I get a congratulations. I let the Soviets completely nuke the entire country, but because of that 0.01%, I'm still alive and I can still come back kicking. So I get a congratulations screen. That to me is amazing. So what are my thoughts on the ColecoVision? I feel that this console is very well made. I especially enjoy the controllers. In fact, out of all the controllers that share this design with a phone pad on it, or the number pad as you will, I find this one the easiest to control. Having a little mini joystick that can be manipulated very easily, rather than a disc on the Intellivision, or the non-self-centering joystick that's on the Atari 5200, I think it makes the games easier to play, as I don't find myself having to struggle against the controller to play each game. Moving on to graphics, this definitely blows any other console out of the water in 1982. The fact that Coleco built the console in order to play an arcade-perfect port of Donkey Kong, this really made the game console capable of playing almost any arcade game of the time. However, this can also be a downfall, as Donkey Kong Arcade really didn't make the console future-proof, because when the Nintendo came out and you had scrolling playfields and multiple sprites, the ColecoVision probably wouldn't be able to keep up, even if it was still being sold during that generation. So do I think that the ColecoVision is worth collecting today? I think that if you're going to collect any console from the second generation of home video game consoles, this one is definitely a grab that you should pick up. To explain my choice, it actually has the largest game library out of any other console at the time, and that's mainly due to the adapter that you can buy with it that'll make it play all the Atari 2600 games. There are a few incompatibilities, but for the most part, it still makes it the largest game library of any console. Now, where would I rank this in terms of what console you should buy first? That is actually an interesting question, and that led me to produce this video in a series of videos that are going to start ranking all of the second generation home consoles into one. I've already done a video on the Atari versus the Intellivision, but now I think it's time to compare consoles of a different caliber. So I'm actually going to start off by comparing this console to the Atari 5200, which came out around the same time, and was Atari's answer to the Intellivision and ColecoVision. So stay tuned for that video where I'm actually going to compare these two consoles. And then the winner of these consoles will actually face off against the winner of the Atari vs. Intellivision consoles. So stay tuned for those videos, as I look forward to bringing them to you soon. And a last-minute arrival to this video is the Module 1, which allows you to play Atari 2600 games on the ColecoVision. And I went ahead and tried it out with the game Pac-Man first. And yes, it is also compatible with the Sega Genesis controller. So since I've already done a video on the Atari 2600, I went ahead and just demonstrated this game to show you how it works, but look forward to more of these in a future video. Well, that's about going to wrap it up for this video. Remember, if you like what you see, please go ahead and click on the subscribe button. And if you want to see some of the videos I've already done, go ahead and click on one of the suggestions that are currently showing up on your screen. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned because I have more content coming. I'll see you guys next time.